Collection for the 2020 census ended this month. Early on, the state worked with the U.S. Census Bureau to encourage participation. That included creating the Arizona Complete Count Committee. Its efforts included outreach in traditionally undercounted areas and adapting to new conditions because of the pandemic. We discussed these issues with the committee's executive director, Alec Thompson.
One challenge that we kind of knew we were facing even pre-pandemic was that level of connectivity, right? And the census is primarily done, or this year was primarily done online. And so we really worked to emphasize the ability of those communities to self-respond, be it by phone, by mail, or online. Those are not the only traditionally undercounted communities in Arizona. We know that non-native English speakers, for example, are a challenge, are often challenged with the count, as well as multifamily residents. I mean, there truly is a wide variety of individuals across ethnic backgrounds, across geographic boundaries that are traditionally undercounted, and so that's why these targeted strategies to reach those communities were such a critical part of this effort.
And what about the immigrant community? Specifically, we hear so much about how some people are concerned about people who were not here documented or here without the proper documentation. That was not a question that was asked, but do you think there was fear in that community?
I think it was definitely a priority for us to remain focused on the message that every Arizonan counts. And when we say that, we mean everyone that's living in the state should be included in the census. Because if you're living in Arizona, you're using our roads. Often maybe you have a mixed status household, then your children are going to the schools. So there's the our message was always focused on if you're in Arizona, respond to the census and make sure you count everyone that's living with you. I think we did a really good job of also making this campaign, this website, et cetera, fully bilingual and making sure that individuals knew that it was safe to respond to the census. So as much as we focused on the importance of the census, we also importance or focused on the fact that it's safe to respond.
And how important are the ramifications of people being counted, the consequences of either participating or not participating in the census count?
Yeah, I mean, we know that a complete census count will impact the next decade in Arizona, and so we know that more than $3,000 per person every year is at stake for someone who either responds or doesn't respond. And we want to make sure that we have that funding that we need to preserve the services that Arizonans expect. Conservative estimates tell us that with just a 1% undercount, we're looking at a loss of about $620 million over the next decade. So that's a really big number, and that's a really big impact for Arizona. In addition to that, I think something that we don't talk about as much as the redistricting portion of this and how impactful that is that Arizona stands to gain an additional congressional seat.
When will we know if we do get an additional federal legislative district and when the Arizona Redistricting Commission will join forces or convene again to talk about those districts?
Yeah, so a lot of people think that the census ends with the count, but really there's a lot of work to be done. So those numbers they now have moved into the tabulation phase. So looking into the data that was collected, removing duplicates, that kind of thing, and then by the end of the year, they have a due date of December 31st to give those numbers to the president for approval. At which point they would be used for that reapportionment of congressional seats.
All right. And what would you like to say about the numbers of people? Did you come up with a really good estimate on the number of people who participated in the census?
Yeah, so the Census Bureau is reporting that 99.9 of households were enumerated. So that means that 99.9 of that inventory of households was either counted or deemed vacant, et cetera. A really impactful number that I think is important for both measuring our success as well as how Arizona did overall is the self response rate, which ended at 64.1%. And so we surpassed the self response rates of the previous 2 decades of 2010 and 2000. And that's a really big deal for Arizona because when you self respond, that data is more accurate and more telling of what our population looks like, the number of people, et cetera. So getting that self response rate increased is a really big deal for our state.
Arizona's self response rate ranked 32nd in the nation, according to data from the U.S. Census Bureau. The percentage of census takers who self responded was about 3 points below the national average.
We do have a more challenging population than other states to get counted in the census because you think about our many tribal communities within the state's boundaries. You think about our large Latino population that you mentioned earlier. We're working to really educate Arizonans around how important this is.
It's too late for 2020 to be counted in this census. What would you say moving forward? I know 2030 sounds like a lifetime away, but what would you say to people who may be listening to this now?
Build on some of the things that we did in 2020, because I think we've set a new precedent for how a state can work together for a complete count. And so I hope that the leaders that take this on in 2030 can really come together and expand and build on what we've done this year.
Alec Thompson, thank you very much for joining
Thank
us.
you. I appreciate it.